All right, time for us to get started. Good to have everybody with us. Good to have our guests with us. This quarter, as we heard in our sermon, we're talking about the spring. We began the year by talking about the winter, how the Bible ends. We talked about the book of Revelation. So in this quarter, we're talking about how the Bible begins. We're looking in the book of Genesis. And our studies today take us to Genesis 6, 7, and 8. We're going to be talking about the flood. And so we have outlines. There are several things on there that you'll need to notice as we go through our lesson today. You know, when we talk about the flood, it is so easy for us to think, well, that goes in these other classrooms where the kids are. And we kind of just leave it there. And we don't realize that this is one of the major biblical events that's talked about all over the Bible. And when we look at what the Bible says about this, it brings up powerful lessons such as sin, the wrath of God, the grace of God, the salvation of God. And so there's just lots of bedrock important lessons that we talk about with this. And so this morning what we're going to do is we're going to spend some time, we're going to read sections, chapter 6, chapter 7, chapter 8, kind of put some thoughts together. And we're going to try to look at some things that maybe you will hear from others, that why this may not be a true story. There's a lot of people who do not believe this is a true story. We'll give you some ideas of how to address those things and consider such things as that. But that's where we're going to be today in our lesson. Glad to have each of you with us. I want to begin, first of all, by the New Testament and looking at some verses where the flood comes up in the New Testament. And then we're going to go back to Genesis chapter 6. So let's begin in Peter's writing. Peter refers to it several times. Let's begin in 1 Peter 3, and then we'll go two places in 2 Peter. But 1 Peter chapter 3, and in verse 20, 1 Peter 3, verse 20, where he talks about those who were once disobedient when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. And so one of the things we notice as we go through these New Testament passages is that the New Testament views the flood as an actual historical event. It wasn't just a story. It wasn't just something that is a neat thing to think about. It is something that actually happened. In 2 Peter and in chapter 2, 2 Peter chapter 2, as we find a quick bullet list of Old Testament judgments. Verse 4 talks about the angels who were judged. Verse 5 says it this way. It says, "And did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly." Then in the next page, chapter 3 of 2 Peter, and in verse 6, and we'll come back to this on one of our questions later on, but there he says, "Through which the world at that time was destroyed, being flooded with water." Again, just stating this as events that actually happened. Then let's go back a little bit earlier. Let's go to the book of Hebrews, Hebrews chapter 11. There's we find Noah, and again, this account being recorded. Noah is mentioned in Hebrews 11 and verse 7. "By faith Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen, in reverence prepared the ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of righteousness, which is according to faith." And then one other one I'll notice is in the words of Jesus, back in the book of Matthew, Matthew chapter 24. Matthew chapter 24. And in verse 37, in the context of the coming of the Son of Man, he says in verse 37, he says, "For the coming of the Son of Man," Matthew 24, 37, "for the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah." So all sprinkled throughout the New Testament is this idea of Noah and the flood. And so this is something, again, that the Bible uses as a kind of like a stake in the ground. This is a great reminder. It's a reminder that God doesn't like sin. It's a reminder that God has a wrath to him. It reminds us of God's grace, and all those kind of bear out with that. So having said that, let's go to Genesis chapter 6, and I'm going to just start with verse 13. Genesis 6, verse 13, read down to the end of the chapter. Then we're going to pick out some points here and just talk about several things we find here. Genesis chapter 6, beginning with verse 13. Then God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them, and behold, I'm about to destroy them with the earth. Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. You shall make the ark with rooms, and shall cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its breadth 50 cubits, its height 30 cubits. You shall make a window for the ark, and finish it to a cubit from the top. Set the door of the ark in the side of it. You shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. Behold, even I am bringing the flood of water on the earth to destroy all flesh, which is in the breath of life. Under heaven, everything that is on the earth shall perish. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. And every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds after their kind, and of the animals after their kind, and of every creeping thing on the ground after its kind. 2 of every kind shall come to you to keep them alive. As for you, take for yourself some of the food of which is edible, and gather it to yourself, and it shall be for food for you and for them. Thus Noah did according to all that God had commanded him. I want you to also notice how chapter 7 begins. And then we'll look at some things in our outline. It says, Then the Lord said to Noah, chapter 7, verse 1, Enter the ark, you and all your household, for you alone I have seen to be righteous before me in this time. That's something to think about, isn't it? You alone. So some things we notice here. First of all, we notice the reason for God's wrath. In verse 13, it says that the end of all flesh has come before me because the earth is filled with violence. We talked last week at the front part of this chapter. It says the thought of man was evil continually. And so Noah stands unique. Noah was not like his contemporaries. You can be righteous in an unrighteous world. That's what I want you to see. It may be where you work is not very righteous. You can be righteous. You can raise your family to be righteous, even though everyone else around you is unrighteous. That's something we see. Now, how this was coming about? This is coming about from verse 17 as God tells us how this is going to be, and he's going to bring the flood of water upon the earth. So over here in the outline on the beige box on the right-hand side here, God tells Noah to build the ark. It's interesting that the Hebrew word for ark is the same word for that basket that little Moses was put in when he was put in the bulrushes. And when you read that account in the book of Exodus, it also says it had pitch around it, basically to make it waterproof and something to make him survive. It was made of gopher wood. And the dimensions, as we put them into our English method today, is about 510 feet long, 85 feet wide, and about 51 feet tall. Has anyone ever been over to the Ark Encounter over there near Cincinnati? If you've never done that, you ought to do that, okay? Now, there's some fabrications they make, there's some guesstimations they make, but one of the most impressive things it is they try to make it life-size. As you're driving up, and you see how massive that thing is. And when you look at it, you think, it would have taken 1,000,000 years to build that thing. It is so big, okay? And so again, when we hear how big it was, it's just hard for us to put that in mind. And so underneath this on the outline, this would be equivalent to 1.5 football fields, 3 levels. So that's a lot of space. Someone has come up, that's equivalent to 450 semi-trucks. That's a lot of space, okay? And so we're not thinking about a little boat and everyone's just squeezed in real tight. There's a lot of room there. There were 3 decks. There was a door on the side. There was a window. and it was covered with pitch to make it waterproof. Chapter 7, verse 2 tells us that they were to take 7 of the clean animals. Every clean animal by 7's male and female. That implies 7 pairs, okay? You have a male and a female, that's 1 pair. You do 7s of that, that'd been 7 pairs. The unclean animals were 2, it says in the next verse. And verse 6 of chapter 7 tells us that Noah was 600 years old when the waters of the flood began. Now, before we go to chapter 7, a couple thoughts here. You'll notice on the outline this little gray box here. There are over 500 worldwide flood legends. From Egyptians, Macedonians, Babylonians, culture after culture after culture has this. One of the things critics say is that whoever wrote the book of Genesis heard about all these stories and just kind of edited it into what we have here. It's interesting, of these 500 stories that's out there, 88% of them have a favored family. And 70% of them have this favored family surviving in a boat. And more than half of them, the survivors, end up on top of a mountain. Okay? Now, how do you account for that? When somebody says, well, this story in Genesis, it's just a borrowed legend. We have legends today, and we've heard this, and we've heard this, and we've heard this, and we've heard this, and we just pull this all together. And so whoever wrote Genesis just kind of took all these stories and was a great editor, and that's all this is. How would you reply to that? Okay. See, the idea of the critics is you've got all these stories out there, and then they come down to the Bible. Maybe it was the other way around. Maybe there was one true story. Out of the Bible came all these other stories, you see. And then we have the proof of the New Testament. And then I'm going to give you some other proof later on, okay? And so as we begin this, we need to see that a lot of people out there just cannot believe there's a worldwide flood. There are those who believe it was a flood, but it was local. It was a small flood. We have floods in our areas, and that's all it was. And we'll talk about that here in just a moment. But again, what we're seeing here is God is declaring, I'm destroying all flesh, except what's going to be in that boat. And again, it reminds us both of the safety, the salvation of God, but also the wrath of God. Any thoughts as we begin this? Any thoughts from chapter 6? Any questions, comments? Okay, let's go on to chapter 7. We'll grab some things here. In chapter 7, let's begin reading verse 6. Noah was 600 years old when the flood of water came upon the earth. Then Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him entered the ark because of the water of the flood. Of the clean animals, and animals are not clean, and birds and everything that creeps on the earth. That's creepy for me right there. I think I would have left off some creepy things, but that's not what God said, okay? And then it says, verse 9, and there went into the ark Noah by twos, male and female, as God had commanded Noah. Came about after 7 days, the water of the flood came upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of that, notice how specific that is. It doesn't say, well, it happened some time ago. When Noah was about 599, 600, it's kind of fuzzy. He names the month, he names the day. This is huge in the calendar of God. Nothing has ever happened like this before. And as we get done, nothing like this will ever happen again through the floodwaters. And so God's very specific here. And then it says in verse 11, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on 17th day, on the same day that the fountains of the great deep burst open and the floodgates of the skies were open. So we got water coming from 2 sources. From above, that's the floodgates. We'd call it rain coming down. But then they have water from beneath. There's water table on the earth. It seems like that burst open. And so you got water come from above and water from below. Then rain fell on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. Let's stop there for a moment. We're going to pick up here in verse 13 in just a minute. Let's take a little detour for a moment. Let's talk about that number 40. It seems to be found a lot in our Bibles. It rained 40 days and 40 nights. What other 40s do we know in our Bibles? Jesus fasted for 40 days. That's right. Matthew chapter 4, verse 2. Okay? What's another 40 days? What about Moses? Okay, Moses was up on the mountain for 40 days, getting the 10 Commandments. Moses fasted for 40 days. Okay? There's another 40 days. You want to remember that? Jesus out of the tomb. He was on earth for 40 days before he ascended. Good. There's yet another 40 days. Deals with David and the Philistine named Goliath. Goliath taunted for 40 days. Goliath and Philistines were taunting Israel for 40 days. And so the spies going into the land, 40 days. Okay? So we kind of look at that. You see over and over how significant that number is. So it rains day and night for 40 days. It doesn't stop. And so picking up here now, verse 13 of Genesis 7, it says, on that same day, Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wives, and the 3 wives of the sons with them entered the ark. And they and every beast after its kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth after its kind, and every bird after its kind, and all sorts of birds. So they went into the ark to Noah by twos of all flesh in which there was breath of life. And let's stop there for a moment. There's a lot of different kind of animals, isn't there? I mean, if you just go down the road of different kinds of dogs, you ever know how many different kind of dogs there are? So do you think Noah had one kind of every single dog there ever was? Every kind of cat there ever was? Every kind of bird there was? Every kind of bug that there was? I guess it'd be a lot of animals, doesn't it? Mr. Mark, what do you think about that? Okay. We got the cat family, don't we? Yeah. What's all in the cat? What kind of cats would be in the cat family? Lions, leopards, panthers, tigers, Siamese cats, little cats, big cats. Okay? And so you remember back in the creation, God made animals after their kind. I think that's significant. I don't think he's saying, okay, I've got me a poodle, and I got this, I got to have a poodle mixed with this kind of dog, I got to have this dog and this dog and this dog. No, that happened later on. He's bringing in kinds of animals. Cat kind, dog kind, okay, other kinds. And from that is what we're going to see that's taking place here, okay? So now, let's read on. Genesis 7, verse 16. Those that entered the ark, male and female, of all flesh, entered as God had commanded them, and the Lord closed it behind them. What's the it? God closed the door. One of our questions is going to be, we'll go ahead and jump ahead. There's another time we read in our Bibles about a door closed. Anyone remember that? It's in the teachings of Jesus. The wise and foolish virgins. And the door was closed, and those who are on the outside could not get in. What a thought that would have been to have that door closed. Not knowing how long you're going to be in there, because I don't think God told him up to this point how long he's going to be in there. What the world's going to look like when this door opens up again. And to know that every single person you ever met outside of your immediate family is not going to be there when that door opens. They're going to perish. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. Then the flood came upon, verse 17, the earth. For 40 days the water increased and lifted up the ark so that it rose above the earth. The water prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. The water prevailed more and more. What we're getting here in chapter 7 is the increase of water. And when we get to chapter 8, what we're going to see is the receding of the water. But in chapter 7, the water is getting higher and higher and higher. Is that what we're seeing? Verse 19, the water prevailed more and more upon the earth, that all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. That's a lot of water, isn't it? It's a lot of water. The water prevailed 15 cubits higher, and the mountains were covered. All the flesh that moved on the earth perished, birds and cattle and beasts and every swarming thing that swarms upon the earth, and all mankind. Of all that was on the dry land, all in those whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life died. He blotted out everything that was upon the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things to birds of the sky, and they were blotted out from the earth, and only Noah was left with those that were with him in the ark. The water prevailed upon the earth 150 days. How long is that? If we put it in months, how long is 150 days? 5 to 6 months. That's a long time. You know, when there's been a spill, what do? We get water to cleanse it. God basically is cleansing the earth once again. And God's changing things as a result of these things. And we see how involved that was. And let's read on here, verse 12. Then he waited yet another 7 days. I was in chapter 8. And so, that ends chapter 7 there as we kind of look at that concept there. On your outline, look at that blue box down at the bottom. Now, there's these mathematical formulas based on Genesis 5 and the population we find in the genealogies in chapter 5. And on the conservative side of a 1.1 population growth, is estimated there was 147 million people on the planet at the flood. Going to a high rate of 1.4 growth rate, is estimated that there's 17 billion people on the earth. And when you go back up to chapter 7, verse 1, only Noah was righteous. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? It's just hard to imagine the massive death that took place. But more than that, the massive disregard for God that had taken place. For generations, people had ignored God and gone away from what God had said. And so chapter 7 of Genesis is basically the purging of sin. God does not tolerate that, and God has a way of dealing with that. Thoughts or questions about chapter 7? Comments? We'll get to second page here, and we'll talk about some of the evidence of this. Chapter 8, let's read the first 5 verses. It says, but God remembered Noah. God remembered Noah, and I think he remembered him in 3 ways. First of all, and that phrase, don't read into that phrase that, oh yeah, I forgot about you. That's how we use the word remember. Oh yeah, I forgot. He didn't forget Noah was in that boat. God didn't look down from heaven and say, what's that little thing floating around on the water? No, he knew all along. And so how he remembered Noah was, first of all, by removing the water. And that's what takes place in chapter 8. Verse 2, the floodgates are closed. Verse 1, the wind causes the water to subside. In verse 4, the ark rests on the mountain in the 7th month. Verse 5, in the 10th month, the mountains become visible. And so what we're seeing in chapter 8 is water's going down. And then the second way God remembered Noah was by sending the sign. This takes place beginning in verse 6, when Noah sent out a dove, and it came back to him. And he sent out a raven. And then he sent out a dove a second time. It came back with a little seedling or a little olive branch in its mouth with a leaf on it. And again, identification that things are getting better. Things are changing here. And then the third way was God spoke to Noah in verse 15. God spoke to him and told him to go out of the ark. As he spoke to him, telling him, come in the ark, Now he speaks to him and tells him to leave the ark. Let's read 6 to 22 here. It says, Then it came about at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made. He sent out a raven. It flew here and there until the water was dried up from the earth. Then he sent out a dove from him to see if the water was abated from the face of the land. But the dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot. So she returned to him into the ark, for the water was on the surface of all the earth. Then he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark to himself. Verse 10, so he waited yet another 7 days, and again he sent out the dove from the ark. Notice just from sentence to sentence, a week, a week, a week. Okay? I mean, we just read this as if it's just like a minute ago. But we're seeing how long Noah is in this ark. Verse 11, the dove came back to him toward evening, and behold, in her beak was a freshly picked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the water was abated from the earth. Then he waited yet another 7 days, and sent out the dove, but she did not return to him again. Now it came about in the 601st year, in the first month of the first of the month, that the water was dried up from the earth. How old was Noah when he got into the ark? Now how old is he? So he's been in that boat for a year, hasn't he? A year. It's a long year, wasn't it? Then Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the surface of the ground was dried up. In the 6th month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. Then God spoke to Noah, Go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh as with you, birds and animals, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may breed abundantly on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. God did not intend for them to live in the ark. The ark was not a monastery. You're going to hide in there and stay in there the rest of your life. You go in there for a reason, you go out for a reason. And again, that's what we see here. And so then verse 20, then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. Then the Lord smelled the soothing aroma, and the Lord said to himself, I will never again curse the ground on account of man. For the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth, and I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, the day and night shall not cease. Now, there is some global, if there was a worldwide flood, we would think, well, there ought to be some evidence of it here and there. And there is, all over the place. We see massive fossilized areas. You don't often find one fossil, you find all kinds of fossils in one area, as if they had been washed up someplace. And that is evidence of that. The idea of the coal beds here in Kentucky and West Virginia and places like that, there's massive areas of coal, and coal is made through pressure and water, and that came about. We see that the geologic timetable, the strata, is inverted in a lot of places, as if the earth turned upside down, as if the bottom broke open, as it talks about bursting from that. There's fossils of sea creatures high on mountaintops above the sea level. How did they get there? We have a lot of inland lakes, massive lakes, Lake Michigan, Lake Erie, some of those big lakes up north, Lake Tahoe. Some of these lakes are massive. They've been there for as long as we know, probably made through the flood. And that's some things, again, that kind of help us with that. You notice on the outline, the cute little picture on the right-hand side. We do that with our kids. We talk about Noah and the ark, and we have little pictures like that. Let's not give them false ideas. First of all, there's a reason for that flood, and that was the sin of man, man's departure from God. And little pictures like that, as if all the animals are on the deck, just kind of having a good old cruise, that's not really biblical. It's not really the way it was made. And so we need to be careful that we don't give people wrong ideas when we talk about some of these things. All right, let's go to our questions now, and let's just kind of walk through some of these as we think about this. Peter implies that the first world was destroyed. We're now living in the second world. Let's go over to 2 Peter chapter 3. And what we want to talk about real briefly here is how did the world change after Noah came out of that ark? 2 Peter chapter 3, as it talks about the coming of the Lord, it says in verse 5, when they maintain this, escapes their notice that the word of God, by the word of God, the heavens existed long ago, and the earth was formed out of the water by water, through which the world at that time was destroyed. The world at that time was destroyed, being flooded with water. But by his word, the present heavens and earth are being reserved for fire. So we got a past tense world and we got a present tense world. That's what Peter's talking about. So when Noah came out of that ark, what was different? Tanner?
Man's relationship with animals.
How's that? Tanner said man's relationship with animals.
Well, I mean, God now gave Noah the opportunity to have the animals ask for food,
Okay.
just vegetations, so you see animals as a source of food.
Okay. Genesis chapter 9 is where that's going to be found. Genesis chapter 9, verse 3, everything that's upon the earth is for vegetation or is for food. Before this, we think every man was just a vegetarian. No one ate animals. Animals probably didn't eat animals. But after the flood, there seems to be a change here. And we're going to see as we go through Israel and all those things that they were making burnt offerings and they were eating the animals. So that's a change. What's another change? After the flood. Okay, hold on just a second. Let's get Michelle here.
Everyone's lifespan?
Yeah. Shorter lifespans. Again, as we went through Genesis chapter 5, there's 10 generations. Enoch was taken up to heaven. Everyone else died. But what we're seeing is I believe there's 8 or 9 people who lived in the 900s. One person lived to be 895. You don't read that after the flood. You don't read about people. Now, you got a few still who are living up in the hundreds. But that just kind of tails off a whole quickly after that. You don't read about somebody living to be 800-900 years old after that. That's a change, isn't it? What other changes? Yeah. We have rain all the time now, don't we? I think before the flood, they didn't have rain. Now we have rain all the time.
Now, before the flood, was it believed that the land is one big mass of land?
Yes,
So, after the flood, did that split the land up?
I think so. So we see in Genesis, it says that the land was gathered into one place. When you look at a globe, land is not in one place. You've got the 7 seas and things all. And then you look at some of our continents. They almost look like puzzle pieces. You can fit them right together there. But they're apart now. But the shapes are just almost identical how they can fit together. How did that happen? Well, we're not told specifically. But when you talk about opening up the deep, bursting things open, could well have been God moved some things around. It's a different world than what it was. Anything else you'd put on that? Anything else? Go ahead. I think the floodwater itself changed the terrains. Floodwaters change terrains, okay? And, down here, we got the knobs, the hills, don't we? Going to Kentucky, lots of hills. You go just a little bit farther north of us, go up into Lafayette, Indiana, you go up in there, it's just flat. It's almost like Kansas. I live next to Kansas. You can roll a quarter all the way to Colorado. It's just flat as it can be. Well, what happened? Well, could have been ice age, could have been floodwaters, but the terrain is different, isn't it? You go down to Tennessee, you look at the Smokies, the terrain is different. So the point is things have changed, okay? Let's move on. Got to go quickly. Number 2, the Lord's reference to Noah in 24:37, which we read, is intended to teach what? The passage is about the destruction of Jerusalem. But the point is, it's going to come suddenly, without warning, without preparation. That's what happened when the flood came. Noah was busy building that ark, but the people weren't paying attention to what Noah said. Number 3, Noah started faithful and remained faithful during the construction of the ark. That is a massive point to understand. A lot of us start faithful to God, but then we tail off and we don't remain faithful. Through all that construction, probably 100-some years to build that ark, Noah never got tired and quit. Noah never said, I cannot do this. He remained faithful, and that's important. Number 4, the love of God and wrath of God come together in the flood. What other occasions do we find the love and wrath of God together? We find them at Jericho, where the walls came down, but there was Rahab, who God gave grace to. We see it at the cross. We see the hatred of sin, but the salvation of mankind. And again, that concept there. Number 5, how would it be possible for someone on the outside of the ark to be in heaven?
Jesus died for us.
Okay.
He reaches back.
But they were destroyed because of their ungodliness. I'm thinking about, again, when we think about the flood, we think about adults. A lot of children died. A lot of children died. A lot of innocent babies died. Okay? Where would they be? Not having sin, they would be in heaven, wouldn't they? It's a thought we don't think about, do we? We sometimes think that everybody on the outside of that door is not going to be in heaven. But I think there were some people who, because of lack of sin, because of their age, would have been there. We talked about number 6, Bible example of the door shuts, Matthew 25, verse 10. Describe the emotional, number 7, spiritual commitment that Noah experienced in preparing the ark. It's just hard to put that in words. The idea that how could all these people be wrong? That must have gone through his mind. How is it it's just me and my family? How is it that he must have gotten people who mocked him and made fun of him? Why are you building this boat for? Why are you building this boat where you're building it? It's not next to water, it's just right here. And how are you going to move this boat? And why are you collecting these animals? And all these things people might have laughed at him and ridiculed him of. But again, to see that Noah did all that God commanded. And so this is a important lesson for us as we think about God's love, God's wrath, God's salvation, God's hope. And again, we see all these images coming back at the cross as well as we think about that. So for next week, we will do Genesis chapter 9. I will be out, but we'll have a teacher to teach you.